It is here, in the vast, arid canvas of North Africa, that a contradiction was born, a thin, vibrant ribbon of life drawn through endless, immutable death. This ribbon, the Nile River, was not simply a feature of the landscape. It was the entire premise of existence, the living artery of what would become Kemet, the Black Land. Before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, there was only the river, and the annual benevolent violence of its flood. Every year, without fail, the great current would swell from the distant highlands, bearing the rich, dark silt that was the very promise of rebirth. This dark, nutrient-rich earth was Kemet, contrasting sharply with the desolate Deshret, the red land of the surrounding sands. The eternal rhythm of this flow and retreat was the first law, the first god, and the first foundation upon which the grand illusion of perpetuity was built. The Egyptians themselves traced their origins not to a conflict of brothers like others, but to an act of primeval, watery creation, a moment they called Zep Tepi, the first time. In the beginning, they believed, there was only the formless, swirling darkness of the waters of none. From this chaos, the first mound of solid earth, the Benben, rose, and upon it stood the self-created god Adam, or sometimes Re, the sun god. This myth is a direct, visceral reflection of their physical world. The primordial waters are the annual flood, and the Benben is the first hillock of dark, fertile mud that emerged as the flood receded, ready to yield life. The cosmic order, the very principle of light over darkness, was therefore inextricably linked to the agricultural cycle. To cultivate the land was to participate in Zep Tepi, to reenact the moment of creation, year after year, guaranteeing that chaos would not reclaim the world. For generations beyond reckoning, the first human inhabitants of this narrow valley were wanderers, their lives dictated by the chase and the season. They were small bands of nomadic hunters and gatherers, skilled in reading the subtle signs of the desert and the river's edge. They knew the routes of the wild cattle, the habits of the migratory birds, and the precise moment when the date palms bore their fruit. Their camps were temporary, their possessions few, their existence a delicate, constant negotiation with the vastness around them. There was no permanence, only repetition. The sun rose, the sun set, and the endless search for sustenance continued. But the river called them closer. Sometime around 5000 BCE, in what we call the Badarian period, a quiet revolution began to stir. It was not a revolution of violence or sudden conquest, but one of slow, deliberate commitment. Certain groups began to pause their wandering, drawn by the predictability of the Nile's gifts. They began to notice that the seeds they scattered in the rich, wet soil yielded more food than the seeds they gathered wild. This simple observation, the power of agriculture, chained them, gently but irrevocably, to the land. The shift from the nomadic existence to permanent settlement was not an overnight transformation, but a slow, decades-long process of settling the soul. They built simple dwellings of mud and reed, temporary protection against the heat and the dust. They learned to work the clay of the riverbank, crafting the beautiful, distinctively thin-walled, black-topped pottery that defines this early age, the first tangible expression of a culture moving beyond mere survival. The dead, too, were given a new importance, carefully buried in the Deshret, the dry sand beyond the fertile margin, facing west, toward the setting sun, where the journey to the afterlife would begin. This nascent reverence for the funerary cult was the first great spiritual commitment of the Egyptian mind. As centuries passed and the agricultural skill deepened, these small settlements grew into larger, more complex villages in the Naqada periods, Naqada 1, 2, and 3. Competition for the best plots of land and for control over the limited irrigation canals became inevitable. The villages, once independent, began to coalesce into larger regional groupings, two distinct realms gradually forming: Upper Egypt, the long, southern stretch of the valley, and Lower Egypt, the broad, sprawling delta in the north. The symbols of these two kingdoms became deeply etched into the collective consciousness. The white crown of Upper Egypt, tall and conical, signifying the stark landscape and powerful sun; the red crown of Lower Egypt, flat with a high back projection, reflecting the marshy delta lands. They existed for a time as separate entities, rivals and neighbors, each developing its own distinctive customs, cults, and local deities. The forces of chaos, represented by division, still reigned, preventing the ultimate realization of Ma'at, the divine order. The culmination of this dawn came with the final act of unification. The historical record is shrouded in the mist of legend, yet the outcome is clear and monumental. The traditional figure credited with this great synthesis is Menes, though he is often identified in archaeology with a ruler known as Narmer. The Narmer palette, a beautifully carved slate shield, stands as one of the earliest and most eloquent historical documents, depicting a king wearing first the white crown, then the red crown, triumphing over his enemies. It is not just a record of battle, it is a theological statement, announcing the triumph of order over disunity, the successful binding of the two lands, Simatoi, into a single, cohesive entity. The unification was not merely a political merger, it was a cosmic event, confirming the divine right of the single ruler who could maintain Marat across the entire length of the river. The seat of this new unified power was established at the pivotal midpoint, where the valley met the delta, a new city known as Eneb-Hej, the White Walls, which would later be called Memphis. This city became the political and spiritual anchor of the emerging nation, the place where the two crowns were ritually joined. With the advent of the First Dynasty, circa 3100 BCE, the long, slow, foundational journey reached its destination. The first pharaohs, the living Horus on earth, now governed an astonishingly long and narrow kingdom. The land had transitioned from scattered, temporary fires into a single, unified state bound by a shared geography, a singular, powerful mythos of creation, and the absolute authority of the divine king. The long night of prehistory was over. The structure of the world was now defined, stable, and ready for the monumental achievements of the ages to come. The first deep breath of sustained civilization was taken, slow and deliberate, on the banks of the Nile. The great experiment of centralized power had begun, rooted in the dark, life-giving mud, awaiting the coming of the stone that would define its eternity. The unification of the two lands, chronicled in the silent testimony of the Narmer palette, was merely the first, decisive gesture. The true, lasting monument was not built of stone, but of parchment, bureaucracy, and the meticulous, slow architecture of rules. With the creation of a single kingdom stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile, the fundamental simplicity of village life could no longer suffice. The challenge was immense. How does one manage the annual distribution of the life-giving floodwaters, coordinate the labor of thousands for irrigation projects, collect grain taxes from the delta to the first cataract, and ensure that the authority of a single, divine man in Memphis resonated equally in every far-flung settlement? The answer lay in a radical new commitment, the codification of existence itself. The profound shift to urban life was, at its heart, an administrative necessity. The capital city of Memphis was the nexus, the pivotal hinge between Upper and Lower Egypt. It was not, in its earliest iteration, a place of grand plazas and glittering palaces, but a vast, organized clearinghouse for the affairs of the entire state. Here, massive granaries were erected, their capacity meticulously logged, workshops for specialized artisans, potters, coppersmiths, shipwrights, began to cluster, and most crucially, the administrative core took root. Life here demanded specialization and a strict hierarchy of obedience, replacing the fluid, communal roles of the village with the fixed, defined tasks of a structured society. It was a life measured not by the season, but by the tally. This new reality demanded a memory far greater and more permanent than human recollection. It required a system that could speak across time and distance, ensuring accountability and continuity. This need precipitated the invention of their unique writing system, hieroglyphs. These sacred carved signs, midunetjer, were born not from the desire for epic poetry, but from the brutal necessity of inventory. The earliest examples are simple labels attached to jars of oil and linen bolts, recording quantity, origin, and ownership. But rapidly, this system evolved into something far more profound than mere record-keeping. Egyptian writing was a magnificent, multi-layered edifice built upon three components. Pictograms, the image represents the object; ideograms, the image represents an idea; and phonograms, the image represents a sound. This complex visual language was intrinsically tied to the maintenance of Marat, cosmic and social order. To write a pharaoh's name was not just to record it, but to invoke his everlasting presence. Writing was, therefore, an act of ritual permanence, capable of binding the truth into the fabric of the universe. Every sign was meticulously drawn, an exercise in visual poetry, intended to be legible for eternity. This required immense time and skill, a slow, deliberate act that mirrored the slow, deliberate pace of the river's flow. The guardians of this sacred complexity were the scribes. Theirs was the most revered profession, a quiet army of administrators who held the true reins of power. To become a scribe required years of grueling, disciplined study, spent copying texts with reed pens onto smooth, expensive sheets of papyrus or flakes of limestone, ostraca. The scribe sat cross-legged, his palette of red and black ink ready, his posture embodying the stability he helped create. The path separated him permanently from the exhausting labor of the fields. A popular text of the time, the satire of the trades, exhorted students to pursue the path of the pen, noting that the soldier is beaten, the peasant is eaten by crocodiles, but the scribe sits in comfort, directing the world. The meticulous, unchanging nature of their craft guaranteed the meticulous, unchanging nature of the state. At the very top of the social pyramid stood the pharaoh, the great house. He was the living embodiment of the god Horus, and upon his death, he became Osiris, the divine ancestor. His role was singular, to enforce Ma'at, ensuring that the world remained in its divinely appointed, balanced state. He was the high priest, the chief administrator, the chief justice, and the supreme commander, the pivot around which all order turned. The pharaoh's divinity was the ultimate guarantor against the return of Isfet, or chaos. Immediately beneath the pharaoh stood the vizier. This was arguably the most powerful non-royal office, the silent engine of the entire administrative machine. The vizier was responsible for everything: tax collection, justice, agricultural surveys, irrigation control, managing the royal workshops, and supervising the police. The famous text, The Duties of the Vizier, instructs the officeholder to act without favoritism, treating all petitioners with equal, measured justice. His word was law, but his actions were bound by a strict, codified commitment to balance and administrative detail. It was the vizier's tireless bureaucratic effort that truly sustained the notion of Ma'at on the ground. The rest of the social order was built of interlocking, specialized layers, each defined by its relationship to the central authority. High officials and nomarchs, the provincial governors, nomarchs, ruled the 42 nomes, administrative districts. Their task was to translate the pharaoh's will into local action, maintaining registers of land ownership and tax obligations, and mobilizing local labor for state projects. They held immense local power, yet their loyalty was constantly monitored by the central authority. The priestly orders. The priests were civil servants of the gods. They did not preach to the masses but maintained the purity of the temples, performing the daily, elaborate rituals to placate and sustain the deities, ensuring the cosmic balance for the whole nation. The management of vast temple estates, complete with farmlands, workshops, and tenants, made them a powerful economic and administrative force. Artisans and craftsmen. These were the highly skilled laborers, jewelers, sculptors, masons, and carpenters, who worked in state-owned workshops, their output dedicated entirely to the temples and the royal court. They were fed, housed, and clothed by the state, living a life of relative security in exchange for their specialized skill. The peasants, farmers, they were the foundation, the vast, anonymous majority of the population. Bound to the land, their lives were an unceasing cycle of plowing, sowing, harvesting, and, crucially, paying taxes in grain and labor. Their agricultural surplus fueled the entire urban and administrative infrastructure. The genius of this early system, particularly during the subsequent Old Kingdom, the Age of the Pyramids, lay in its ability to centralize and administrate a massive logistical effort using only basic tools and the complex, slow power of the written word. Every life, every field, every sack of grain was slowly, meticulously drawn into the orbit of the pharaoh's administration, creating a society that valued structure, predictability, and the deliberate, enduring pace of the eternal river that gave it life. This was the first great, successful bureaucracy, a testament to the power of rules to shape the destiny of a nation. With the beginning of the Third Dynasty, circa 2686 BCE, Egypt entered the defining era of its early existence, the Old Kingdom, the Age of the Pyramids. This was the time when the pharaoh transcended the role of simply a regional king and became the undisputed, living deity of a unified state, a transformation that demanded an epic scale of command and the systematic projection of power beyond the fertile valley. The reigns of these earliest monarchs were not marked by the tumultuous drama of personal intrigue, but by the quiet solemnity of systemic consolidation. The sheer ambition of their public works speaks to an unprecedented mastery of logistics and control. The true marvel of the Old Kingdom was not the pyramids themselves, but the sustained generations-long effort to coordinate every single resource, every quarryman, sailor, mason, scribe, and farmer, under a singular, unchallengeable authority. This effort required an infrastructure of governance that was, in itself, the first great conquest. The monumental change began with Pharaoh Djoser and his visionary architect, Imhotep. Imhotep, whose name is one of the very few from this era to survive the passage of time, conceived of a new, eternal house for his master, moving away from the simple mud-brick tombs, mastabas, of previous generations. He built the step pyramid at Saqqara. This structure was a revelation, the first colossal building in the world constructed entirely of dressed stone. It was a staircase to the heavens, symbolizing Djoser's ascension to the eternal stellar realm. The step pyramid was an unmistakable declaration of power. The pharaoh commanded the very substance of the earth, forcing stone to submit to human design. This project required the mobilization of labor and resources on a scale never before witnessed, effectively forging the earliest organized state from the raw materials of labor and administration. Following Djoser, Pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the 4th dynasty, brought this ambition to its zenith. His reign was an astonishing, sustained dedication to construction. Sneferu built not one, but 3 massive pyramids, the Mihdam Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid. The sheer scale of stone moved under his command is staggering. He alone is estimated to have ordered the cutting, transportation, and placement of more blocks of stone than his later successors, Khufu and Khafre. This output required a highly structured, almost military-like organization of the labor force, a disciplined corps of workers, engineers, and overseers who operated with the precision and obedience of a vast, peaceful army. It is here, in the necessity of maintaining and fueling these titanic projects, that the first organized army quietly emerged. This force was not primarily an army of territorial conquest in the modern sense. It was a tool of resource extraction, defense, and enforcement. Its components included border guards and garrison troops, stationed at key points in the Nile Valley, particularly at the First Cataract near Aswan, and along the desert routes. Their primary function was to defend the agricultural heartland from incursions by desert tribes, particularly from the west, Libyan Desert, and the south, Nubia. Expeditionary forces. These were not vast legions, but highly organized detachments of men, often combining soldiers, laborers, engineers, and scribes, dispatched on dangerous long-range missions into the deserts. Their objective was specific: to secure access to valuable raw materials that the Egyptian heartland lacked. Mobilized state labor. While not soldiers, the disciplined masses of men mobilized for the pyramid projects and irrigation works operated under strict command structures that mirrored military discipline. Obedience, hierarchy, and massive coordination were the defining characteristics of power. The initial conflicts that defined the territory were, therefore, less about the grand subjugation of peoples and more about the controlled expansion of the state's access to vital goods. The geography of scarcity dictated the foreign policy of the Old Kingdom. The most critical area of early power projection was Nubia, the lands south of the First Cataract. This region was the inexhaustible source of gold, necessary for the divine trappings of the pharaoh and the treasury. Stone, hard, dark granites and diorites used for monumental sculptures and sarcophagi. Manpower, used as auxiliary troops or labor in the Egyptian state machine. Early campaigns into Nubia were not protracted wars but punitive or resource-securing expeditions. The pharaohs sent missions to chastise the miserable Kush, or simply to bring back tribute, euphemisms for enforced trade or raids that ensured the continuous flow of materials vital to the royal workshops and eternal building projects. These expeditions were often recorded in biographical inscriptions of expedition leaders, detailing the thousands of head of cattle, the vast amounts of incense, and the unfortunate Nubians brought back to serve the crown. To the east, the Sinai Peninsula was the focus. Here lay the deposits of copper, essential for tools, and turquoise, a highly valued mineral for jewelry. expeditions to Sinai had to contend with the local Bedouin tribes, who resented the intrusion into their territory. These were often heavily guarded, well-documented mining operations rather than wars, though clashes were inevitable. The military's role was to secure the desolate routes and protect the miners and artisans. The Old Kingdom was thus an age of epic power expressed through monumental logistics. The wars were cold, calculated efforts to maintain the continuous supply chain that fed the divine pharaoh's appetite for eternity. The subdued nature of this epic power is found in the very materials they sought: the relentless pursuit of gold for its incorruptibility, stone for its permanence, and manpower for its ability to transform the transient resources of the valley into an architecture that defied the inevitable passage of time. The scale was immense. Mountains moved, rivers navigated, deserts crossed, all for the singular purpose of ensuring that the pharaoh, the living pivot of Ma'at, would ascend eternally, guaranteeing the order and prosperity of the land he had so completely commanded. The grand ambition of the pyramids, the ceaseless flow of the administrative machine, and the disciplined movement of the army were all outward expressions of power. Yet, the true, enduring strength of this civilization lay not in its colossal stones, but in the internal landscape of its people. To move from the noisy quarry to the stillness of the private dwelling, one must slow the rhythm of thought and explore the quiet purpose that motivated the farmer in the field, the scribe at his desk, and the craftsman in the royal workshop. What did they believe? What was the structure of the world they perceived, and what quiet moral code guided their intimate, daily lives? Their spiritual reality was a tapestry of astonishing complexity, a framework designed not merely to worship, but to explain and maintain the observable world. The Egyptian faith was intensely polytheistic, but their deities were not distant rulers. They were embodied functions of the cosmos, often tied directly to natural forces. The sun was not just light, it was the god Re, the annual inundation was the god Hapi, and the air itself was Shu. This meant that every task, from planting a seed to drawing breath, was a direct interaction with the divine. At the core of their belief was the intricate concept of the soul, a multifaceted entity that traveled the path to eternity. The soul was not a single, indivisible thing, but a collection of spiritual forces that needed to be kept whole for the afterlife. The Ka, this was the life force, the spiritual twin, born with every person and remaining with them after death, requiring food and drink. The body served as the anchor, the necessary dwelling place for the Ka to return and find sustenance. The Ba, this was the personality, the mobility, the ability of the deceased to travel from the tomb back to the world of the living, often depicted as a human-headed bird. The Ak, this was the ultimate goal, the spirit's perfected form, achieved only when the Ka and Ba successfully reunited in the afterlife. The Ak became an effective spirit, capable of interacting with the gods and influencing the living. This profound spiritual anatomy explains the extraordinary, generations-long commitment to mummification and the elaborate preparation of the tomb. The goal was not to defy death, which was inevitable, but to defy decay. The physical body, the Kaith, had to be preserved intact so that the Ka would always have a precise, recognizable home to return to. The meticulous removal of organs, the slow drying of the body with natron salt, and the wrapping in hundreds of yards of linen were not macabre acts, but solemn, necessary steps to ensure the individual's successful transition from the transient world of the living to the eternal realm of the West. The ethical and spiritual structure of daily life was anchored by a single, powerful concept: Ma'at. This term, often translated simply as truth or justice, was in fact the encompassing, guiding principle of the entire cosmos. It meant balance, harmony, cosmic order, and right conduct. Living in accordance with Ma'at was the ultimate spiritual duty, a continuous, subtle effort to keep chaos, isfet, at bay in one's own heart and actions. The culmination of a life lived by this code occurred at the moment of judgment, as detailed in texts like the Book of the Dead, or the chapters of Coming Forth by Day. The deceased would enter the Hall of Two Truths for the weighing of the heart. Before the god Osiris, the heart, believed to be the seat of intellect and memory, would be placed on a great scale, balanced against the feather of Ma'at. The deceased would recite the negative confession, a list of sins they had not committed. I have not committed evil against mankind. I have not blasphemed a god. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. If the heart balanced the feather, the deceased was declared Ma'at Keru, true of voice, and admitted into the eternal paradise of the field of reeds. If the heart was heavier than the feather, a sign of a life heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by the monstrous Amit, and the spirit ceased to exist. The philosophical lesson was clear and constant. The integrity of one's moral actions in life determined one's fate for eternity. Within the social structure, the foundation of this moral stability was the family unit, the pur. The household was the primary economic and social institution. Unlike many neighboring cultures, women in ancient Egypt enjoyed a remarkably high status and legal standing. The law considered men and women equal in almost all respects. Women could own, inherit, and sell property, enter into binding legal contracts, and initiate divorce proceedings. The wife was respected as the Nebat Pur, the mistress of the house, managing the domestic economy with autonomy. The core purpose of the marriage was progeny, the quiet assurance that the family line would continue, ensuring that the necessary offerings were made at the tomb to sustain the ka of the ancestors. The practical education of the children was aimed entirely at producing functional, ethical adults ready to serve the bureaucracy or manage the household. Formal education was rigorous but pragmatic, centered on the mastery of the complex script. A boy destined for a governmental career spent his youth mastering hieroglyphs and the more practical hieratic script, copying texts that instilled the central philosophy of the age, wisdom literature. This wisdom literature, such as the maxims of Tahotep from the 5th dynasty, represents the earliest known philosophical thought of the civilization. It was not abstract metaphysics, but intensely practical ethical instruction designed for court officials, yet applicable to all. The tone is gentle, paternal, and relentlessly focused on conduct. If you are a man of authority, be patient when you listen to the words of a petitioner. Do not dismiss him before he has purged his body of what he had intended to tell you. Advice on listening and humility. Be not arrogant because of your knowledge, but confer with the ignorant man as with the learned. Advice against intellectual pride. If you are one among the guests at the table of one greater than you, accept what he gives when he places it before you. Advice on modesty and hierarchy. These texts reveal a quiet, profound culture that valued humility, controlled speech, justice, and diligent service above all else. The Egyptian ideal was the successful, silent administrator, the master of his craft and his temper, who lived his entire life as a slow, deliberate offering to the maintenance of Ma'at. The ultimate stability of the civilization rested not on the weight of the stone, but on the enduring, internal commitment of millions of individual hearts striving to balance the feather of truth. If the Old Kingdom was the seed of Egyptian permanence, expressed through the brutal simplicity of the pyramid, then the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, was the full, glorious bloom, the age when the narrow, protected kingdom along the Nile transformed into a cosmopolitan imperial power. This was the golden zenith, a sustained period of influence, wealth, and architectural output so vast it seemed to stretch the very capabilities of the human imagination. The tone of this era was one of unassailable confidence, a profound belief that the order of Ma'at had not only been maintained but had been expanded to encompass the known world. The wealth that fueled this zenith did not come from a single lucky discovery, but from a strategic, 3-century-long commitment to imperial expansion under the mighty Thutmoside dynasty. Following the expulsion of the foreign Hyksos rulers, the pharaohs realized that defense was no longer enough. Security required control of the source of resources. Campaign after campaign, led by warrior kings like Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, pushed the empire's borders deep into Nubia in the south and across the Levant into Syria in the northeast. From the distant Euphrates to the Fourth Cataract, the world bent its knee to the gold-rich land of the Nile. The sheer volume of tribute flowing into the capital of Thebes, now Luxor, was staggering. Caravans arrived laden with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, silver rings from the Aegean, cedar timber from Byblos, copper ingots from Cyprus, incense and myrrh from the land of Punt, and most importantly, endless supplies of gold from the Nubian mines. The pharaoh was no longer merely a local king. He was the Sun King, the central node of a global economic network. The most serene expression of this prosperity was found in the reign of Amenhotep III, who ruled during the 14th century BCE. His era was marked by peace and unparalleled extravagance. His diplomatic archive, known as the Amarna letters, reveals a world of foreign kings writing to him, not in military challenge, but in supplication, constantly requesting Egypt's gold, which they deemed plentiful as sand. This gold was not hoarded, it was consecrated to the gods and, by extension, to the creation of eternity on earth. The architecture of the new kingdom shifted its focus from the isolated pyramid, a tomb for one man, to the massive temple complex, a perpetual house for the gods and the sustaining engine of the entire state. The greatest expression of this engineering and spiritual commitment is found at Karnak. Karnak was not built, it grew, slowly, deliberately, over 2 millennia, with every major pharaoh adding a new courtyard, a pylon, or an obelisk, striving to outdo his predecessor in the glory offered to Ammonius-Re, the king of the gods. The hypostyle hall. This hall, built primarily by Seti I and his son Ramesses II, stands as the zenith of Egyptian structural engineering. Covering an area of 50,000 square feet, it contains 134 colossal columns, the central 12 of which stand 70 feet high. The placement, carving, and lifting of the massive architraves onto these pillars required a level of logistical coordination and mechanical insight that seems to defy the absence of iron tools or modern machinery. The engineering was a testament to simple, massive stone leverage, countless hours of precise masonry, and the coordinated power of thousands of laborers, working in the slow, inevitable rhythm of the state. The obelisks, these towering monoliths, carved from a single piece of Aswan granite, represented the petrified ray of the sun god. Queen Hatshepsut commissioned 2 of the most magnificent, one of which still stands at Karnak. The process of quarrying, moving, often floating them hundreds of miles down the Nile on specialized barges, and then erecting a 97-foot, 300-ton granite needle was an act of profound engineering faith. It required the precise excavation of a channel in the bedrock around the stone, the skilled use of levers, ropes, and sand to slowly slide and tip the stone into its final, perfectly aligned position. Hatshepsut herself embodied the zenith of peaceful, infrastructural power. She built not through conquest, but through commerce, financing the famous expedition to Punt. This trade mission, brilliantly depicted on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, was a logistical masterpiece, bringing back live incense trees, myrrh, ebony, and exotic animals. Her temple, carved directly into the sheer cliffs, represents a different kind of architectural triumph, a series of colonnaded terraces, perfectly integrated with the immense, awe-inspiring landscape. The shift in funerary practice further illustrates this era's peak prosperity. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom abandoned the easily plundered pyramids for the secrecy of the Valley of the Kings. The tombs were hidden deep inside the Theban hills, representing a radical engineering commitment to concealment. Yet, while the architecture of the tomb was hidden, the contents reflected the maximum accumulation of wealth. The relatively modest tomb of Tutankhamun, a minor king, was found intact and revealed a treasury of gold, alabaster, and intricate artistry that speaks volumes about the unimaginable, systemic wealth of the entire New Kingdom. The creation of such luxury goods required generations of sustained prosperity and the highest levels of artistic specialization, all dedicated to preparing one man for eternity. Even the public works of this zenith were grand. While the Nile provided the primary aqueduct, the control systems were monumental. Great mud brick barrages and coordinated canal dredging projects were undertaken annually, ensuring the maximum distribution of the floodwaters across the broadest possible area. The capital city of Thebes itself became a sprawling metropolitan complex, supported by efficient, state-run bakeries, breweries, and workshops, a testament to the administrative machinery running at peak efficiency, maintaining the illusion of a golden age that would never dim. The great stone temples, the towering obelisks, and the hidden golden tombs were not just monuments. They were the physical evidence of a perfected, awe-inspiring, and enduring state machine. The stability and wealth of the golden zenith, built upon the solid foundation of the Nile Valley, inevitably created a powerful gravitational pull. No civilization, no matter how self-sufficient, exists in a vacuum of perfect isolation. The need for materials that the desert denied, wood for architecture, copper for tools, and aromatic resins for the rituals of the gods, compelled Kemet to look outward. This expansion of need gave rise to vast, slow networks of exchange, binding the core of Egypt to the periphery of the known world, a connection achieved through the deliberate, measured flow of ships, caravans, and gold. The internal artery of this entire system remained the Nile itself. Before any external route could function, the central logistical challenge of moving goods within the long, narrow kingdom had to be mastered. The river was the highway, the silent, efficient bearer of all commerce. River traffic moved in a rhythm that defied the muscle of man. Goods flowed south to north by simply floating with the current, while northbound journeys utilized the strong, persistent wind blowing from the Mediterranean, sails catching the breeze to move against the flow. This two-way, natural efficiency allowed for the easy distribution of goods collected from thousands of miles away, from the timber yards of the delta to the granite quarries near the First Cataract. Every boat was a floating repository of the state's wealth, and its arrival and departure were meticulously recorded by the harbor scribes. The external reach of the empire was organized around 4 cardinal directions, each defining a vital trade corridor and a specific kind of exchange. 1. The southern corridor, Nubia and the land of gold. To the south, the connection with Nubia, Kush, was more than trade, it was a resource imperative. Nubia was the Tasseti, the land of the bow, and its greatest gift was gold, the metal that never tarnished, reflecting the incorruptible flesh of the gods. The route was arduous, involving not only the river but the portage of boats and goods around the formidable cataracts. Rocky, impassable stretches of the Nile that required the deployment of highly skilled teams of workers and engineers. Caravans also navigated the Wadi al-Laki, a long, desolate desert route that bypassed the river's bends, protected by heavily armed forts and supplied by deep, carefully guarded wells. The trade was simple but profound. Egyptian grain, linen, and manufactured goods flowed south in exchange for gold, diorite, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals. This slow, continuous flow of gold transformed Egypt's economy, making its royal treasury the envy of the ancient Near East and providing the very substance of its imperial dominance. 2. The Eastern Corridor, Punt and the Red Sea coast. The Red Sea marked the eastern boundary of their immediate influence, a route made famous by the New Kingdom expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. Punt was the source of frankincense and myrrh, the aromatic resins essential for temple rituals and embalming. Reaching Punt required a great logistical effort. Caravans first traversed the eastern desert from the Nile to the Red Sea coast, a trek that required careful measurement of water and time, where ships were built or reassembled from prefabricated components. The gentle, expansive tone of Queen Hatshepsut's reliefs detailing this mission emphasizes the careful logistics, the loading of specialized barges, the gifts exchanged, and the quiet return voyage with trees planted in baskets. This trade was slow, highly specialized, and ritualistic, reinforcing Egypt's spiritual needs. 3. The Northern Corridor, the Levant and the Mediterranean. Across the Great Green, the Mediterranean, the trade was driven by a single, critical necessity: wood. The Nile Valley was devoid of the massive, structural timber needed for ships, temple doors, and monumental construction. This need was supplied almost entirely by the cedar forests of the Levant, particularly the ports of Byblos and Ugarit. Egyptian ships would sail north along the coast, laden with gold, papyrus, and grain, returning with fragrant cedar. This route introduced Egypt to the maritime world, initiating cultural exchange with the flourishing Minoan and later Mycenaean civilizations, visible in the occasional imported Aegean pottery found in Egyptian tombs. 4. The Western Corridor, Libya and the Oases. To the west, the trade was more focused on securing the vital oases of the Libyan desert. These oases were sources of wine, dates, and sometimes specialized auxiliary troops. The routes were sporadic and dangerous, undertaken by small, hardy groups of traders and scouts who maintained essential wells and carefully charted the movements of water and sand, ensuring that the necessary connections for life, however sparse, were maintained across the vast Deshret. The flow of currency in this system was not driven by standardized coinage, which had yet to be invented, but by the slow movement of value. The Egyptian system relied on barter and standardized weights known as the deben. A deben was a fixed unit of weight, around 91 grams, of copper, silver, or gold. Prices for goods, a jar of oil, a day's labor, a sack of grain, were quoted in deben. When trade occurred, payment was made in the equivalent value of a physical commodity. grain, linen, or often, rings of copper or silver measured by weight. The vast imperial gold that poured into Thebes was not currency in the modern sense. It was the sacred metal of the state, used primarily for diplomatic gifts, religious offerings, and monumental art, fueling a gentle, continuous exchange of physical value based on trust and fixed weights, ensuring stability in transactions across the breadth of their influence. The consequences of this global connection were subtle, but profound. The slow movement of goods was inseparable from the slow movement of cultural exchange. The new kingdom was far more cosmopolitan than the inward-looking Old Kingdom. Technology, the introduction of the horse and chariot from the Near East revolutionized Egyptian warfare and elevated the status of the charioteer class. Language, the incorporation of Semitic loan words into the Egyptian language became common, reflecting interactions with administrators and merchants from the Levant. Deities, foreign gods such as Baal and Astarte were quietly accommodated into the Egyptian pantheon, often assimilated into existing deities like Set or Hathor, reflecting a pragmatic openness to the spiritual beliefs of their trading partners and subjects. This vast network of slow, measured trade was the invisible thread holding the empire together, a gentle, expansive system of logistics that ensured the necessary resources flowed inward, while the cultural influence of Kemet quietly permeated the world around it. It was a golden age sustained not just by military might, but by the enduring, predictable pace of the caravan and the sailing barge. The illusion of the golden zenith, vast and brightly illuminated, was dependent entirely upon the relentless, predictable turning of the great cosmic wheel, Ma'at. For centuries, this order seemed effortless, guaranteed by the divine pharaoh and the tireless efforts of the state machine. But the nature of history, like the nature of the desert, is cyclical. Even the most perfectly engineered system cannot perpetually resist the slow, insidious forces of entropy. The decline was not heralded by a sudden cataclysmic crash, but by the subtle, sustained stress of systemic failure, a slow, quiet fraying of the social, economic, and divine threads that bound the kingdom together. The initial signs of trouble were political, rooted in the very success of the new kingdom's centralization. To maintain the colossal temples and fund the constant wars, the pharaohs had endowed the temples, particularly the temple of Ammonius at Karnak, with vast tracts of land, enormous wealth, and thousands of tax-exempt serfs and artisans. By the end of the 20th dynasty, the high priests of Ammonius had accumulated wealth and influence that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, the crown itself. This created a sustained political upheaval, a slow, internal schism. The power of the pharaoh in the north, the Delta region, began to wane, while the authority of the high priest in the south, Thebes, became increasingly secular and military. This was a deep, systemic fracture, the country quietly splitting into two spheres of influence without a formal declaration of war. The divine sanction of the pharaoh, the singular pivot of Ma'at, was diluted, replaced by two competing centers of power. This internal competition was not violent at first, but it paralyzed the administrative heart, halting the grand, unified logistical projects that had defined the zenith. The very mechanism of command had seized up. Simultaneously, the vast machinery began to suffer from a crippling economic inflation and strain. The state's ability to pay its loyal servants began to falter. The most poignant evidence of this systemic stress comes from the secluded artisans' village of Deir el-Medina, whose residents, the skilled builders and decorators of the royal tombs, were among the best-paid workers in the land. When the state's grain supplies failed to arrive, or when they were short of the promised measure, these craftsmen, in the 29th year of Ramesses III, did the unthinkable. They staged a strike. This was the first recorded industrial action in history. The scribes' records detail their desperate pleas. "We are hungry. We have no oil, no fish, no vegetables." A strike by the state's elite workers, protesting the failure of the central authority to provide basic sustenance, was a shocking and undeniable symptom that the economic promise of the empire had withered. The value of the standard unit of trade, the deben, began to fluctuate wildly, and the state, desperate to fill its dwindling coffers, resorted to an increasing reliance on copper and silver of lesser purity. This debasement, coupled with the drain of tribute from the Levant following the Sea People's invasions, see Part 8, left the treasury hollowed out and the economic system prone to panic. Wealth was no longer circulating cleanly. It was becoming locked away in the temple estates, creating an economic stagnation that fed the quiet despair of the common worker. The deep psychological blow, however, came from the devastating natural disasters that undermined the core theological premise of the Egyptian world. The stability of Ma'at was conditional on the annual, life-giving regularity of the Nile flood, Ake. A continuous series of periods marked by low inundation began. The failure of the flood was not simply an inconvenience, it was a cosmic crisis. If the river, the living body of the god Hapi, failed to deliver the dark, life-giving silt, it meant the pharaoh had failed in his central duty to maintain order, or worse, that the gods themselves had turned away. Low floods meant low harvests. Low harvests meant famine. The slow, relentless creep of starvation across the land was documented in temple inscriptions that lamented the misery. The peasants were forced to eat reeds and mud, families broke apart in the desperate search for food, and the social order descended into the chaos, Isfat, the state was meant to prevent. This long, drawn-out agricultural crisis lasted for generations, breeding a deep-seated anxiety that shattered the old kingdom's faith in perpetuity. The land that was supposed to last forever was failing to produce food. Compounding this misery were the major plagues that swept through the crowded metropolitan centers, often carried along the same trade routes that had once brought prosperity. While specific records are rare, the dense, urbanized life around Thebes and Memphis made them vulnerable to highly lethal, infectious diseases. A sickness that could kill quickly and indiscriminately was a profound challenge to the structured, predictable nature of Egyptian life. It represented an unseen, unknowable source of chaos that the priests could not placate and the pharaoh could not defeat. The quiet, solemn confidence of the people began to be replaced by a fatalistic resignation. The final, bitter systemic failure was the widespread breakdown of the moral code, the failure of Ma'at in the hearts of men. This is most vividly witnessed in the era of rampant tomb robbery. The eternal resting places, painstakingly built and sealed against time, were systematically desecrated. Scribes recorded detailed reports of confessions, trials, and executions of gangs of robbers, often including priests and state officials, who broke into the royal tombs to strip them of their gold and valuables. This widespread, organized sacrilege was the ultimate profanation. It did not just steal riches, it destroyed the deceased's chance at eternal life, shattering the spiritual contract between the living and the dead. The fact that the very men charged with guarding the tombs were often the thieves proved that the once unbreakable administrative structure had succumbed to corruption. The system, designed to last forever, was now being cannibalized from within by the very officials sworn to uphold it. The golden light of the zenith was fading, replaced by the deep, pervasive anxiety that the world was slowly, melancholically slipping back into the primeval chaos of none. The age of confidence had yielded to the age of resignation. The confidence of the new kingdom, forged in gold and sustained by the sheer effort of will, eventually yielded to the weight of exhaustion. The systemic cracks of the previous age widened, not in a single catastrophic failure, but in a quiet, agonizing disintegration, the inevitable moment when the central flame flickered and the distant provinces, left in the dark, had to generate their own dim light. This period, known as the Third Intermediate Period, c. 1070 to 664 BCE, was the desperate attempt to save the integrity of the land by allowing it to break, a resigned recognition that unity was no longer possible, and fragmentation was the only path to local survival. The political division that emerged was the Egyptian equivalent of a grand, desperate split, severing the nerve centers of the kingdom. Following the reign of the last great Ramesses, the unity of the two lands officially dissolved. The state fissured into two distinct administrative halves, separated by miles and ambition, yet still bound by the pretense of a single culture. In the north, the central authority resided in the delta, eventually establishing a royal seat at Tanis. The rulers here claimed the pharaoh's titles, but their effective power rarely extended beyond the delta's fertile plains and coastal trade routes. This northern kingdom was pragmatic, focused on survival through commerce and diplomacy with the rising powers of the Levant. In the south, the spiritual and economic powerhouse of Thebes fell entirely under the control of the high priest of Ammonius. This was the definitive spiritual split. The high priests assumed military command and civil administration, essentially ruling as God's viceroys. The sheer distance between Tanis and Thebes, 1,000 kilometers of river, exacerbated the administrative break. orders no longer flowed cleanly from a single source. The nation was governed by a long-distance, tenuous equilibrium, held together only by the shared belief in Marat and the ritual recognition of the northern king. The greatest evidence of this resignation was the complex accommodation of foreign migrating tribes. Egypt, exhausted by centuries of internal command and external wars, began to rely heavily on immigrant populations for its military and security. The Libyans, the warlike tribes from the western desert, Jehinu, had been a perennial nuisance but now became an essential component of the state. Generations earlier, after the conflicts of the late New Kingdom, these Libyan peoples were not expelled, but settled within the delta as prisoners of war, border guards, and, crucially, mercenaries. These settled Libyan families, known by their tribal names, such as the Meshwesh, slowly assimilated Egyptian culture while retaining their own fiercely independent military traditions. Through loyalty in service and judicious marriage alliances, their chieftains accumulated immense local power in the strategic garrison towns of the delta. This slow integration culminated in the establishment of the 22nd dynasty, founded by the Libyan chief Shashank I. Here was a foreign dynasty, a family of Libyan blood, now wearing the double crown of Egypt. This was not a conquest from the outside, but an internal takeover facilitated by administrative collapse. The Egyptians, weary and fragmented, resigned themselves to being ruled by men who were physically foreign but who, crucially, pledged to maintain the form of the ancient Egyptian pharaonic tradition. Shashank I even sent his own family members to become high priests of Ammonius in Thebes, attempting to bridge the distance and restore centralized control through foreign agency. This accommodation only intensified the fragmentation. The 22nd dynasty was soon challenged by local rivals, leading to the 23rd and 24th dynasties, where the delta became a patchwork of competing city-states, each ruled by powerful Libyan-descended chieftains, sometimes known as the Great Chiefs of the Ma. The central concept of the pharaoh had dissolved into a collection of local warlords, all speaking Egyptian, honoring Egyptian gods, but fundamentally focused on their own territorial survival. As the northern delta was occupied by these resilient, integrated outsiders, salvation, or further complication, came from the deep south, a territory Egypt had once ruled, Nubia, or Kush. The Nubian people, having preserved the pure, uncorrupted traditions and rituals of the New Kingdom pharaonic cult, saw the chaos in Egypt not as an opportunity for conquest, but as a spiritual duty to restore Marat. Around 732 BCE, the Nubian king Pianki, ruling from his capital at Napata, launched an invasion of Egypt. This was an astonishing moment where the cultural periphery invaded the core to save the core's own traditions. Pi conquered the fragmented Egyptian rulers, defeated the Libyan chieftains, and installed himself as the pharaoh of the 25th dynasty. The Kushite pharaohs brought a profound, yet distant, restoration. They built in the ancient style, restored ruined temples, and commissioned inscriptions celebrating their adherence to Old Kingdom virtues. Yet, their capital was far away, in the heart of Nubia. Their rule was predicated on the premise that they were more authentically Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves, but the seat of power was distant, adding another layer of separation to the beleaguered land. The reign of these Nubian pharaohs brought the defensive struggles on the frontiers to a critical pitch. Their efforts to reunify the land brought them into direct, fatal confrontation with the most formidable power of the age, the Assyrian Empire of Mesopotamia. The Assyrians, with their iron weapons and brutal, disciplined siege warfare, viewed Egypt as the last obstacle to their regional dominance. The Kushite pharaohs, attempting to protect the Levant as a buffer zone, fought the Assyrians repeatedly. The inevitable consequence was a direct invasion of Egypt itself. The Assyrian armies swept into the delta, driving the Kushite rulers south. The final, crushing blow came in 663 BCE when the Assyrians sacked and devastated the magnificent city of Thebes, the sacred heart of the empire, stripping its treasures and shattering its centuries-old sanctity. The devastation of Thebes signaled the turning of the tide from internal crisis to external domination. The final, desperate act was one of strategic withdrawal. The Assyrians, unable to govern such a distant land directly, installed an Egyptian vassal ruler, Psamtik I, of the city of Sais in the delta. Psamtik successfully expelled the remaining Assyrians and initiated a brief, brilliant period of quiet revival, the Sate period, 26th dynasty. This revival was defined by a self-conscious archaism, an attempt to return to the glory of the Old Kingdom by copying the titles, art, and language of that distant age. It was a final, resigned acknowledgement that the great imperial experiment was over, and the only hope was to retreat to the familiar, enduring forms of the past. The illusion of eternity was finally broken, replaced by the reality of constant, defensive struggle against the inexorable approach of larger, non-African powers. The quiet dignity of the Sate revival, that last brilliant attempt to recapture the stability of the distant past, proved to be an effort of quiet desperation, a final artistic flourish before the canvas was ceded to foreign hands. Its promise of renewed independence, predicated on a fragile alliance with distant powers, was extinguished by the unyielding weight of imperial ambition. The twilight of the Pharaohs was not a swift, dramatic sunset, but a long, somber dusk, punctuated by shadows that grew ever deeper and more foreign. The true moment of initial collapse arrived in 525 BCE, at the Battle of Pelusium. The mighty armies of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, led by the warrior king Cambyses II, defeated the Egyptian forces, opening the entire valley to conquest. Egypt, the great civilization of 3,000 years, became a mere satrapy, a province, in an empire whose true seat of power lay across the desert, in Susa and Persepolis. This Persian domination was a profound, chilling shock to the Egyptian spirit. The pharaoh was now the king of Persia, ruling by proxy through a distant governor. For the first time, the sacred concept of the Egyptian ruler, the living Horus who maintained Ma'at, was held by a man who had no personal stake in the rhythms of the Nile, no understanding of the gods of Thebes, and no lineage traced to the sun god. Though the Persians sometimes paid lip service to the temples, the administrative reality was one of exploitation, heavy taxation, and cultural indifference. The temples, once the engine of the national economy and spiritual life, suffered neglect. The priests, once the intellectual elite, became marginalized. The great administrative system that had worked for millennia now served a foreign, extractive purpose, draining the resources of the valley toward the eastern plateau. For a brief, tumultuous span, native Egyptians managed to seize back control, installing local dynasties, the 28th, 29th, and 30th, that desperately fought to reclaim the ancient sovereignty. These last native pharaohs, like Nectanebo II, were masters of defensive warfare, fortifying the delta and using the marshy terrain to their advantage. Yet, these reigns were momentary flashes of resistance against an inevitable geopolitical force. The Persians returned, and the yoke was fastened once more, heavy and unyielding. The administrative breakdown continued, exacerbated by the constant shifts in allegiance and the sheer effort of resisting a power that seemed infinite. The nature of the empire's end, however, was sealed by a decisive, almost casual interruption in 332 BCE, the arrival of Alexander the Great. When Alexander marched into Egypt, he was greeted not as a conqueror but as a liberator from the oppressive Persian rule. Recognizing the profound spiritual and religious power embedded in the pharaonic office, Alexander made a point of immediately respecting the local traditions. He journeyed deep into the western desert to the oracle of Ammonius at the Siwa oasis, where he was proclaimed a divine son of Ammonius Re, a strategic and spiritual maneuver that validated his rule in the eyes of the Egyptian priesthood. Alexander's greatest single act was the founding of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. This city was designed to be the nexus of the Greek world, a center of commerce and Hellenistic culture, complete with a legendary library and the towering lighthouse of Pharaohs. It was a city facing outward, toward the sea, a psychological shift that began to pull the cultural heart of Egypt away from the protective, inward-gazing rhythm of the Nile Valley, towards the volatile, cosmopolitan future of the Mediterranean. Following Alexander's untimely death, his empire was parceled out among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy Soter, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty, 305 to 30 BCE. This was the final, 3-century-long act of the twilight. The Ptolemies were kings in Egypt, but they were intrinsically and stubbornly Greek. They ruled from Alexandria, spoke only Greek, and maintained a massive, highly technical Greek bureaucracy. This dynasty perpetuated a strange, uneasy administrative dichotomy. In Alexandria, the world was Hellenistic, law was written in Greek, taxes were calculated in Greek currency, and the court was a center of philosophy and science. But outside the city walls, in the villages and temples of the Nile Valley, the ancient Egyptian life continued. The priests still tended to the gods, spoke the native Demotic language, and maintained the ancient legal and ritual forms. The Ptolemies realized they needed the priesthood and the temple structure to maintain land control and labor management. They built magnificent new temples, Edfu, Dendera, Philae, not out of sincere devotion to Maat, but as a pragmatic means of placating the native elite and integrating themselves into the ancient pattern of royal patronage. However, the slow administrative breakdown was relentless. The centralized Greek bureaucratic machine, designed for maximum tax extraction, became corrupt and brittle. Heavy taxation and endless demands for labor led to native Egyptian revolts, periodic, desperate uprisings that the Ptolemies ruthlessly crushed. The vast agricultural wealth was funneled almost exclusively to maintain the extravagant, distant court life in Alexandria and to pay for the endless foreign wars of the Greek kings. The heart of the land grew weary under this systematic economic exploitation. The final generations of the dynasty were defined by internal intrigue, civil wars, and the inexorable rise of Rome. The Ptolemaic court grew decadent and murderous, consumed by sibling rivalries and weak succession. The administration lost control of the country, becoming a pawn dependent entirely on the good graces of the Roman Republic. The final, somber moment of the collapse centered entirely on one extraordinary woman, Cleopatra VII. She was the last significant leader, the final, desperate champion of Egyptian sovereignty. Unlike her Ptolemaic predecessors, she consciously and brilliantly worked to embody the lost pharaonic ideal. She learned the Egyptian language, the first of her line to do so, appeared in public adorned in the robes of the goddess Isis, and used the ancient spiritual legitimacy to bolster her secular power. Her entire reign was a final, dramatic negotiation against the historical inevitability of Roman absorption. Cleopatra's strategy was genius and fatal. She tied the fate of Egypt to the fate of the most powerful Roman commanders, first Julius Caesar, and later, Mark Antony. Her alliances were not born of love, but of necessity. Her only hope was to keep Egypt intact by supporting a friendly Roman power against the encroachment of the Roman Senate. The final, climactic tragedy unfolded not in the Nile Valley, but on the sea. The joint forces of Antony and Cleopatra were decisively defeated by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. This defeat was the final administrative death knell. Octavian pursued them to Alexandria. The city fell. Antony committed suicide. In 30 BCE, Cleopatra followed him into death, choosing a quick, deliberate end over the humiliation of being paraded as a captive through the streets of Rome. With her passing, the 3,000-year history of the independent pharaonic state, native and foreign pretender alike, came to a final, absolute stop. Egypt was immediately annexed, becoming the personal possession of the Roman emperor. No longer a kingdom, no longer a semi-independent state, it was reduced to a mere breadbasket, an administrative district whose purpose was to feed the endless appetite of Rome. The greatest empire of antiquity ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, reflective sigh, as the last of the pharaonic lineage consciously chose silence over subjugation. The grand era was over, and the enduring silence of the desert reclaimed the valley once more. The final collapse of the pharaonic state was not the erasure of a civilization, but the profound dispersal of its foundational ideas. History confirms that nothing truly great ever dies, it merely changes its address. When the final Roman governor ascended the steps of the Serapeum, the age of Egyptian kings had ceased, but the quiet truths they had forged along the banks of the Nile were already woven deep into the intellectual and architectural fabric of the world that followed. The legacy of Kemet is a silent one, perceptible not in the clamor of conquest, but in the enduring permanence of stone and the slow rhythm of Western thought. To look upon the architectural remains of ancient Egypt is to encounter eternity made tangible. The pyramids of Giza, the Valley of the Kings, the temples of Karnak and Luxor, they are not merely ruins. They are physical declarations of intent, monuments built with the singular, unshakable belief that the forces of decay could be conquered by sheer scale and mathematical precision. The sheer volume of material, the flawless engineering, and the astronomical alignments continue to inspire a hushed awe that transcends time and culture. They stand as a quiet testament to the first great administrative state, proving that a centralized, sustained effort of human labor could indeed achieve something that felt, to the ancients, like godly permanence. When a Roman emperor commissioned a massive, enduring public work, he was consciously or unconsciously mirroring the logistics pioneered by Imhotep and the builders of the Fourth Dynasty. The principle that large-scale infrastructure validates central authority, a principle at the heart of every modern state, was perfected on the banks of the Nile. The enduring legal and administrative codes of Egypt did not survive as codified texts in the manner of Roman law, but their influence seeped into the Hellenistic world through Alexandria and then into Rome itself. At the core of their governance was the theological concept of ma'at, the universal principle of balance, truth, and justice. This was not a set of penalties, but a moral framework for governance. The king must rule justly because justice is a cosmic necessity, not a political convenience. Greek and Roman philosophers who studied in Alexandria encountered this deeply rooted, religiously sanctioned code of conduct. The Egyptian emphasis on bureaucratic fairness, on the meticulous documentation of land and taxation, and on the legal parity between men and women, provided an early, successful template for a sophisticated society. While Rome codified and generalized the law, the ancient Egyptian machinery provided the first proof of concept, that a large, diverse population could be managed effectively, justly, and continuously, based on paper, papyrus, and standardized weights, Deben. The very idea of an accountable, permanent civil service, the true power of the scribes, was a quiet inheritance passed to later empires. Perhaps the most potent and quietly pervasive legacy lies in their concepts of the afterlife and the soul. The Egyptian invention of the multi-part soul, the Ka, Ba, and Ak, provided the world with one of the most sophisticated early models of spiritual identity, distinct from the simple idea of a shadow self. This idea, the meticulous preparation for eternal life, and the concept of a final, ethical judgment, the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, deeply influenced the religious and philosophical currents of the Near East. The solemn, terrifying moral calculus of judgment and reward, the notion that one's deeds determined one's fate, filtered through Jewish and Hellenistic thought, helping to shape the concepts of heaven and hell, reward and damnation, that would later become central tenets of Western monotheism. The quiet Egyptian assertion that a good life here guarantees a life hereafter remains one of the most enduring historical truths passed down from the silent temples. The lasting impact on language is a story of decipherment, discovery, and continuity. The magnificent, visual language of the hieroglyphs eventually evolved, through simplification for daily use, into the cursive hieratic, and later the even more simplified Demotic script. When Christianity arrived in the valley, a final, crucial transformation occurred. The native Egyptian language, at its final stage, was written using the Greek alphabet supplemented by a few Demotic characters for Egyptian sounds that Greek lacked. This new script and language was Coptic. Coptic became the liturgical and spoken language of Christian Egypt for 1,000 years, and it remains the sacred language of the Egyptian Church today. This continuity ensures that the direct descendant of the language spoken by the pyramid builders is still heard in prayer, maintaining an unbroken linguistic link spanning 5,000 years. The ultimate key to unlocking this silent legacy, however, was the Rosetta Stone. Found in 1799 during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, this seemingly unremarkable slab of granite contained the same decree written in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. This serendipitous trilingual text provided the patient, meticulous scholar Jean-François Champollion with the crucial tool needed to crack the code. The subsequent decipherment of hieroglyphs in 1822 was an epical moment, the sudden, dramatic restoration of 3,000 years of silent voices. This act birthed the modern discipline of Egyptology, ensuring that the entire grand chronology of the civilization was not only recovered but integrated into the human story. This recovery fueled the enduring phenomenon known as Egyptomania, the quiet fascination with the valley's secrets. From the obelisks erected in global capitals, like London, Paris, and New York, to the architectural motifs on modern buildings, the silent, enduring forms of Egypt have become universally recognizable symbols of mystery, wisdom, and permanence. The civilization's greatest historical truth is the sheer depth of its chronology. The long, stable duration of the Pharaonic age provided the first solid historical anchor for Western thought, giving scholars a fixed, immense timeline against which to measure the briefer, more turbulent histories of Greece and Rome. Thus, the story of ancient Egypt does not end with Cleopatra's death. It lives in the slow, deliberate pace of the modern academic, in the structural integrity of the public works, in the moral consciousness of justice, and in the enduring silence of the great temples that still stand, facing the dawn. They achieved the eternity they sought. The pharaohs and their millions of subjects, through their commitment to documentation and stone, have outlasted every conqueror, every political creed, and every succeeding empire. Their legacy is not a memory of chaos, but the triumphant, philosophical assertion that order, once achieved, whispers its truth forever. The river still flows, the sun still rises, and the quiet testament of Kemet remains, patiently awaiting the next gaze.